Sports Radio.
Here comes the siren. I want to go higher. Oh, my goodness.
Will defend. Oh! LeBron James with no regard for human life.
Pass is intercepted at the goal line by Malcolm Butler. Unreal.
Oh, baby, for sure.
Cabin Sports Radio starts now.
My God, what a crazy 2 weeks it's been since our last show. Last Cabin Sports Radio episode was March 9th. We took last one off because of everything that was going on that was just so far beyond the world of sports. And here we are 2 weeks later. Mike's not allowed in the building. Yes, I'm sorry, no Unbreakable Mike Gibbons today. At least not in studio. We will hear from him. We'll hook up with Mike a little bit later on in the show, but as part of the precautions that we have taken within the last couple weeks here at Cabin Radio, very restricted as to who is allowed in the studio as we and everyone else continues to navigate this ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. So we're being safe here, but still bringing you an episode of Cabin Sports Radio, which is always brought to you by Sport North. They are moving sport forward. You can find them at sportnorth.com. And what's going on with them? Well, in the world of sports in general, not a whole lot, but if you go to sportnorth.com, you will find right now on their homepage, they are taking nominations for the Sport North Awards Banquet, which hopefully will be able to go ahead as planned. It is scheduled for Saturday, May 30th at the Explorer Hotel. And if you go to sportnorth.com, you click on that link to make a nomination. They've got all the nomination forms there for you to fill out and nominate a deserving candidate for Sport North Awards. They've got the Active for Life Award, the Coach of the Year Award, Contributor to Sport Award, the Team of the Year Award, Athlete of the Year Award, Community Contributor, Official of the Year, and Corporate Contributor. And you can find all of that once again at sportnorth.com. So it's going to be a little bit of a different story. As I mentioned, we will, or rather a different show tonight. As I mentioned, we will hear from Mike. We'll chat with him a little bit, see how he's going amidst everything that has happened within the past 2 weeks. Again, it just feels so crazy to say that our last show was 2 weeks ago. So much has happened since then. A lot has happened in the world of sports despite basically everything being canceled. And with more on that, let's get into it with our CSR news headlines. I know. You're used to the dulcet tones of Mike Gibbons following that intro. Alas, here are my frantic, shaky tones. The Canadian Olympic and Paralympic Committee has made a preliminary decision regarding the 2020 Tokyo Olympics, announcing in a joint statement that Canadian athletes will not be attending the Games unless the event is pushed back a year. Last week, the IOC Coordination Committee announced that there was no May deadline, as had been rumored, and they remained confident that the Games would go ahead as scheduled beginning July 24th. The Canadian Committee becomes the first international committee to announce their decision regarding the upcoming Games amid necessary response, acknowledging the COVID-19 pandemic. Obviously, the biggest news of the day, if you go to TSN, Sportsnet, any other sports website, it is all over the news. They've got some reactions from some Canadian athletes, and Dick Pound going one step further, saying that, in his opinion, we would be fooling ourselves to think that this will all be said and done by this summer. So basically saying the Olympics should just cut their losses and make the decision sooner than later. They have not, again, come out and said officially anything from the IOC's perspective yet, but with the way things have transpired in the last 2 weeks and the way things have changed so quickly, in the past couple weeks. I would almost be shocked if we didn't hear something official from the IOC within this week, but we will see what happens. In the NFL's all-time winningest quarterback, Tom Brady, finally ended months of speculation last week. First, by announcing that he officially would not be re-signing with the New England Patriots, with whom he spent his entire 20-year football career with. And then days later announcing that he had agreed to terms on a 2-year deal with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. To which, when I heard that, I couldn't help but get that Simpsons thought from the Clown College episode in my head, where Homer just kind of out of nowhere stands up and he's like, "That's it. You've all stood in my way long enough. I'm going to sign with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers." I don't think any of us expected him to say that. I'm sure some people did, but either way, it seemed a little surprising. But nevertheless, Tom Brady, should the NFL season go ahead as planned later this year, he will be the starting quarterback for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and thus begins the next phase of the GOAT, the winningest quarterback in NFL history. It's going to be weird. It's going to be so strange not seeing him in a Patriots jersey. I can only imagine what fans of the New England Patriots are thinking. And it seemed like there was a feeling of closure when he officially announced that he would not be re-signing with the New England Patriots. But I got to think, the fact that he has now made it official that he has signed with another team, a little bit of that realness sets in. And then it's going to be even more so when you see him in a Tampa Bay Buccaneers uniform. That is going to look very, very, very strange. Shortly following that, former first overall draft pick and Heisman Trophy winner Jameis Winston, and former quarterback now of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, posted a goodbye message to the Bucs faithful saying, quote, "It's been a great 5 seasons as a Buccaneer. All love and respect. I love Tampa, and I look forward to seeing y'all again in February." No word yet as to where Winston may be heading next. Meanwhile, his runner-up in the 2015 NFL Draft, the second overall pick, Marcus Mariota, who somewhat surprisingly found himself looking elsewhere for employment when the Tennessee Titans announced that they had agreed to terms with Ryan Tannehill on a 4-year, $118 million contract extension. And that one is still being debated wildly around NFL circles. He has found himself a new home, signing a 2-year, $17.6 million contract with the Las Vegas Raiders, which puts an interesting situation now on Raiders starting quarterback David Carr, which a lot of people are thinking, well, very familiar scenario to Mariota's could play out if he plays well, if he plays up to the ability that I think everyone knows that he does have. He may just Tannehill Carr and then find himself with a nice little payday after that 2-year contract ends. Elsewhere in football, the XFL has officially called off the remainder of its inaugural season, version 2, making the decision public on Friday. With that decision, the league also announced that its contracted players would be released and allowed to pursue NFL opportunities as NFL free agency continues. Man, that Vince McMahon, he just can't buy a break, huh? And finally, in hockey, Canada's premier junior hockey league, the CHL, has officially canceled the 2020 Memorial Cup due to safety concerns over the COVID-19 pandemic. The Memorial Cup has been awarded annually to top junior and amateur hockey clubs, originally in Canada and then North America, as the 3 leagues that comprise the CHL, the Western Hockey League, the Ontario Hockey League, and the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League expanded to include a handful of American-based teams since 1919. This is the first time in its history that the Cup will not be awarded.
The CSR Podcast.
Cabin Sports Radio brought to you by Sport North, moving sport forward. Check out sportnorth.com for more. Obviously, not a whole lot going on right now, but they remain the sponsors of the show, and we are very happy that they are. Thank you, Sport North, for continuing to be great supporters of Cabin Sports Radio. I'm joined on the phone right now by Unbreakable Mike Gibbons. Is this broken? I don't know, Mike. Have we reached a turning point here? Do we need a new nickname amidst COVID-19?
No, I don't think now's the time for a rebrand. We'll We'll hold firm. We'll come out of this stronger than ever before. It's worked in the past. If you're okay with it, and you were the one who gave it to me, I think. This goes back to, what, our first job together?
Yeah, like 2015, yeah.
Yeah. So if you're okay with it, I'm cool keeping it as is.
Okay. And I mean, yeah, this is, like you say, a bad time for rebranding. No one's buying merchandise right now anyway. So, yeah, I think we want to avoid that nonsense. And, we'll stick with Unbreakable because, I mean, you're doing all right? I mean, we
merch
took the
sales are pretty steady. Me personally, yes, I'm doing well. I'm social distancing, as I'm sure you are too. I am calling you from the very remote spare bedroom in my household. So taking all precautions, as everyone else should be.
Yeah,
and we'll get through this.
Absolutely. We took the show off last week, of course, because last week, I mean, in the country in general, but I feel like even just specifically in the Northwest Territories, it was a bit of a turbulent week as far as news that was coming out with the COVID-19, the response, the measures that were being put in place by the Chief Public Health Officer. And much like the rest of the sports world, I think we both just, I mean, I know you were busy, like you literally did not have time to even put any thought towards the sports show, but that was kind of a symptom of what we've all been going through in the past 2+ weeks. I mean, it seems like longer because it's been so hectic with all the news and all the information that's come out, but we've kind of followed suit in the way that we've kind of realized that, you know, with all this going on, sports has literally taken a back seat to our lives and right here on Cabin Radio. It just, I think, occurred to me, I knew you were just bogged down in work you had to do, but it occurred to me that, you know, maybe this is the time that we take a show off because, like I said, we're all kind of in a situation where sports is very much secondary to what's going on.
Yeah, and it just seems like things are accelerating more and more with pretty much every new day. You know, in the past, I don't even know what day of the week it is half the time, just because of all the new measures that are in place now. And even here in town, obviously, schools closing down, border closing down to most people with some exceptions, getting our first case here. So things are accelerating really, really quickly, and with that, things are changing, and more to come. We'll probably hear of further restrictions. We know about all the social distancing measures. So not just at home, but abroad as well, elsewhere in Canada, and I'm sure we'll see a lot more in the coming days. And this might be our new reality for a lot longer than people may care to admit. We could be looking at a couple of months here of social distancing measures to help flatten that curve. So we might be doing this show remotely for a little bit.
Yeah, and I mean, with that in mind, there was obviously a pretty big announcement that came out, I believe just this morning. The Canadian Olympic and Paralympic Committee making the preliminary decision regarding the 2020 Tokyo Olympics, announcing in a joint statement that the Canadian athletes would not be attending the games unless the event is pushed back by a year. Now, they are the first Olympic country group to make this decision. I'm sure there will probably be others following suit sooner than later, but obviously this is big news because, I mean, you know, less than a month ago on this show, we were talking about the news that the Olympics, the IOC, was talking about the possibility of having to delay or cancel the games altogether, what that would look like, taking all possible scenarios into consideration. As of just last week, they decided, or at least for the time being, we're saying that there's no deadline and they're still anticipating that the games will go ahead as scheduled as of July 24th. But obviously this is a big, big announcement and something that the IOC is going to have to take into major, major consideration.
Yeah, and I think we both expressed some surprise too, especially after seeing what all the major sports leagues in North America did. I think the first domino to fall really was the NBA, and I think that was right after one of our shows. Was that 2 weeks ago now?
Right.
Seems like a lifetime. And then, you know, shortly after, a couple of days, the NHL, MLS making similar announcements. MLB is going to be postponing their start date. I think we're looking at least a month. But now some owners and general managers are saying that spring training would need to be extended. So that would push it back even further. But that might even be a little eager. And some of the leagues have talked about, at least among ownership groups, when they could possibly resume the end of regular seasons, at least for the NBA and NHL, and then transition into postseason. But I think even talks of that at this point is still a little premature, a little eager. So after those, 4 major sports leagues, at least in North America, decided that they would put everything on hold for the time being. And then, of course, leagues overseas doing the same, soccer leagues throughout Europe. I was kind of surprised, honestly, that we hadn't heard anything from the IOC yet, being a much, much larger event than any event that any of these leagues could put on. You're literally bringing the athletes of the world together in one venue, and it's going to attract hundreds of thousands of fans alongside them, let alone the athlete village with athletes from across the world. So a little surprised that even still to this point, nothing has officially been announced. I think you're kind of seeing the tone change a little bit in the last couple of days here as measures are sort of ramped up across the world. Mm-hmm. Even I think the Japanese Prime Minister saying this morning, we're probably looking at some kind of postponement. So I think good on the Olympic Committee here in Canada, who really was the first to publicly say that they would not be sending their athletes to the games as a precautionary measure unless there is some type of delay. And I believe Australia then followed suit. And I think now they're telling their athletes to basically prepare for competition sometime in 2021. So surprised that it's not really coming from the horse's mouth at this point. It's not coming from the International Olympic Committee. Now it's taking independent nations like Canada and its Olympic Committee to say, no, we don't want to send our athletes here as a safety measure. So I think we'll probably see other nations follow suit. I feel like we'll hear something from the States. I think track and field and swimming both have said that, or called at least for a postponement. But with the amount of cases, and when you sort of look at the curve right now in other nations, you kind of get worried when you look at the United States. Like they're not flattening the curve nearly as quickly as other countries in the world. So it could get quite a bit worse there. So I'm surprised we haven't heard anything official from their CEO of their own Olympic Committee, but I feel like that might be the next one to come, and then that would really put pressure on the IOC to make it official, but I feel like it's coming.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like you could kind of understand why the IOC would want to tread lightly, because I mean, like I said, all of us in the past month, the past 3 weeks, the past 2 weeks, and like especially for us here in Canada and in northern Canada for the past 2 weeks, it's been such a hour by hour, minute by minute type of thing, and it's kind of changed our entire outlook on how we're just communicating and how we're socializing. It's changed so much within such a short span of time that you could kind of see why the IOC looking ahead being like, okay, well, worst case scenario obviously is that we have to cancel altogether or delay until, perhaps next summer. But best case scenario, if we all get this under control within, the next hopefully month or so, because I think the whole world has really kind of turned the corner in at the very least understanding how important this situation is and how important it is that we all as individuals take it seriously and take it upon ourselves to do the responsible thing, social distance, isolate if necessary. Health organizations have done a great job, even specifically right here in the NWT, of getting that information out to people and changing as the information has changed, which has been very, very rapidly. So I could kind of give the IOC a bit of credit here for taking a bit of a wait and see approach. I mean, obviously that's not necessarily the way you want to do things, especially when you're coordinating something as huge as the Olympics. But you almost see how it would be up to the individual country Olympic committees to basically decide for themselves and say, we've decided that this is not what we want to do. We don't think it's safe. And then see how each country individually feels before making an overall decision. I feel like you could give them a little bit of credit there.
Yeah, and it's obviously, we're talking about an entirely different beast here. It's a global competition. The NBA, the NHL, NFL, MLB, MLS, they generate massive revenues, but they're mostly, domestic contests outside of games that are played between a Canadian franchise and an American franchise, but good diplomatic relations. So it's not to the same extent. We're talking about literally a global competition that brings athletes from every single continent all to one place, and a pretty densely populated part of the world too. Japan is not a big country.
Exactly.
Tokyo is extremely dense in terms of its population, and now you're bringing in all these athletes and all of the fans and spectators that come with that. We had a trip planned to there in June, so we've obviously gone about canceling that for the time being.
Yeah.
And even then, securing hotels was pretty difficult. We weren't going there for that, but even then, securing hotels was pretty difficult. So, a lot more at stake here. We know how expensive the games are after being hosted here in Vancouver back in 2010. Everyone heard about how much of an effort it was to even get the games on their feet in Sochi in 2014. They're massively, massively expensive and requires a ton of volunteer and corporate efforts and fundraising. It is a huge decision to make, and it's impacting people around the world. So, we are talking about a different beast. They're going to take their time. But just given how much this is accelerated, even in the past, literally 5 days here, I was kind of expecting it at this point, and I really do feel like it is going to come soon.
Yeah, and much like you, Nicole and I were planning a trip to Costa Rica. We were actually supposed to leave this week.
Oh wow!
Which we a week or so ago had to finally make the decision. And I mean, it was ultimately taken out of our hands. And I feel like that's kind of what it is going to come down to for the IOC with this year's Olympics. It's such a tough decision to say, no, we're going to call it off, even though we still have this decision to make. It might come down to, like you say, each country individually taking that decision out of their hands. Yeah.
And I think their hands will be tied when one of the much larger states, I think as soon as the United States issue a statement of their own, that would really force their hand. But then, some of the other usual contenders like China or Russia, the UK or something like that, once you start seeing some of those countries pull out, that would just ramp up pressure even more. And then I feel like an announcement would be inevitable, and I think we're moving towards that.
Wouldn't that be kind of ironic if in the end China was the last country mulling it over? Like, we don't make any decisions too quick. Okay, turning our attention to, because you mentioned the NBA and the NHL, obviously just 2 weeks ago, we were talking about the decision that was ahead of the NBA and the memos that had been circulated at that time, which was they were preparing for the possibility of playing in empty arenas. And at that time, 2 weeks ago, the last show we did, we were talking about LeBron James' response to that, which was, I won't play. And then, as fortune and fate would have it, you don't have an option. LeBron, the rest of the season is pretty much canceled. Yeah. It's just, again, it's crazy to think that that's where we were just 2 weeks ago. But also a bit crazy was, of course, the original positive COVID-19 tests that came out of the Utah Jazz, and the Raptors had just finished playing the Utah Jazz that night. They got tested. They have not had any positive tests come back, correct?
No, they have not.
Yeah. Okay. So that was, I think, that had to be a scary situation when that news broke that not only one but two Utah Jazz players had tested positive for COVID-19. I can't imagine the Raptors locker room and just, how nerve-wracking that was as you're getting tested, knowing that, like, I was bumping up against this guy. I might have had him, like breathing right in my face. Like it's crazy to think about.
I think I was at a local pub here watching that game because I think it was what ended up being our last local basketball game of the season. Right. We canceled everything after that point, and there was actually an altercation between Rudy Gobert and OG Anunoby. So they came to blows almost at one point towards the end of the game. Jeez. So there's obviously regular physical contact over the course of a game, but things actually got physical and words were exchanged at one point. So we now know that at that time Gobert was carrying the disease. A little, you don't want to use the word ironic, but it wasn't a great look for Gobert because we of course saw the video of him not taking precautions and not treating the virus seriously. Right. There was that clip of him in his during media access of him pretending to cough and going around and touching all the other reporters' microphones and other personal equipment. Yeah. And then within the next day, they announced that he was positive for COVID-19 and that he had in fact spread it to another teammate, Donovan Mitchell, and that other teammates were upset with how he had handled the situation and how he didn't take it seriously. But really, really hard to imagine that was 2 weeks ago. Exactly 2 weeks ago. Yeah. We haven't had a show since, and LeBron James hasn't played a game since. And we were almost scoffing at the idea of games being played with no spectators. It just seems so surreal. Yeah. But now we're even beyond that. We're not having games, period. Yeah. And I think the NHL and NBA, anyways, are looking at maybe resuming the end of their season sometime in early June, with playoffs even going into the late summer. Right. So who knows? Maybe that's a little eager, but that's the new reality that we're living through each day. Yeah, and if you thought the NHL season and playoffs lasted too long before, oh my! Well, get ready for the COVID era, my friend. Oh, yes. Speaking of the NHL, there was news that was released this past week that two Ottawa Senators players had tested positive for COVID-19. Those, to my knowledge, were the only and have been the only positive tests so far. I'm sure the NHL, just like the NBA and other professional leagues, has probably done pretty extensive testing of their players and doing everything they can to make sure them and their staff are safe. So I think that is all that has come out from the NHL. They did not identify the two players for safety and privacy reasons, but they did mention in an article that the Ottawa Senators had their most recent road trip had been through California, playing the San Jose Sharks, the LA Kings, and the Anaheim Ducks, and it seemed like a pretty strong thought that that's where it had been picked up. So obviously, kind of scary stuff there, but in the NHL's case, proving that this was the right decision, because even like that within 14 days, you had a couple positive tests. So if they had not acted faster and not put the season on hold, you don't know. You hate to think that more positive tests would have happened. So, they made the tough decision when they needed to make it. And, I guess we'll just kind of wait and see what happens here, because as we've learned in the past 2 weeks, a lot can happen within 2 weeks. What could next week's show possibly bring? Even closer to home, like now, the latest advice from our chief public health officers any gatherings of any size should be canceled going forward. So cramming 20,000 spectators into a single building, probably not the best idea at a time like this. And I think right around the time of our last show, it was SAP Center in San Jose. I think there was a confirmed case in the Valley there. So they were entertaining the idea at the time of having some Sharks games played without fans, which sounded really weird. Yeah. And then, of course, within a matter of days, the NHL suspended its season indefinitely after the NBA did. One kind of curious thing is, and obviously this would be a personal decision, in the NBA, we know of probably publicly about maybe a dozen cases or so now. Marcus Smart of the Celtics, Kevin Durant is among 4 Brooklyn Nets who have tested positive for COVID-19. The league announced that a member of the Nuggets organization had tested positive. Of course, Gobert and Mitchell of the Jazz, 2 Lakers players, and I think even a Sixers, 3 members of the Sixers organization, but that could be coaching staff or players. I don't think they announced, but interesting that some people are coming right out and saying that they were diagnosed themselves, but the confidentiality of others is being protected at this time. And I think that's kind of something important to note too, is people obviously are entitled to their privacy and their confidentiality in terms of health matters. But it is interesting that some of the more prolific players, at least in the NBA, are coming out and telling people that they've been diagnosed. But it brings more attention to it and the severity of the coronavirus and how easily it can spread. So all we know of right now, anyways, in terms of cases in the NBA.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, my friend. Well, I think we'll let you go. I think that's enough sad chat today for Cabin Sports Radio. We'll be back. We'll chat with you next week, of course. And who knows? There may be more sad stuff to chat about then.
Yeah. We'll see. One day at a time.
All right, Mike. Great to hear from you, my friend. And stay safe. And we'll talk to you next week.
All right. You keep social distancing now.
Will do, sir. You as well.
The Cabin Sports Radio Podcast, brought to you by Sport North, moving sport forward.
Cabin Sports Radio is brought to you by our friends at Sport North. For more, check them out at sportnorth.com. And as I mentioned earlier on in the show, if you would like to submit a nomination for the 2020 Sport North Awards, the Sport North Awards annual banquet happening at the Explorer Hotel Saturday, May 30th. And they've got a full list of nomination forms below on that page. Go to sportnorth.com/programs/SportNorth Annual Awards, and you can submit your nominations today. So thank you, Sport North, for being a continued sponsor of Cabin Sports Radio. Great to hear from Mike a little bit earlier in the show. Unbreakable Mike Gibbons, as I mentioned off the top of the show. Of course, not allowed in the studio, as we here at Cabin Radio continue to put measures in place, as everyone else is, to keep our community safe amid the COVID-19 pandemic. So, Mike, sorry, but for the foreseeable future, you got to stay the hell out. All right? He sounded great on the phone, though, didn't he? Man, what kind of phone that guy's got? Gotta ask him. That's some quality audio right there. Don't you wish we could all go back to a simpler time? Yes, I think we're all feeling that way when, of course, you could still casually, without giving it a second thought, just go out for a beer with a friend. There would be hockey on every night. Brad Marchand could lick other players, and it was just kind of frowned upon rather than dangerous and irresponsible. Yeah, you remember that a couple of years ago? Doesn't that really change the whole context of everything with what we're dealing with now? Can you imagine in today? Oh my God. Back 2018, it was just, it's not really classy. You shouldn't do that. If you had a cold, might spread that cold to Leo Komarov, or I think it was Ryan Callahan was the other player he licked. Yeah, he was developing quite a history, quite a reputation. Or he might have just kissed Leo Komarov. Maybe that was all it was. And then he took it up a notch the next year against Ryan Callahan of the Tampa Bay Lightning. I think when hockey, if and when the NHL does come back, which, by the way, was just watching TSN's coverage of the Board of Governors meeting, which happened today. The NHL, as with every other major sport league, continuing to navigate things as information comes to us by minutes, by hours. It's continually updating. And like everyone else, we're just trying to stay on top of it, let alone ahead of it, just trying to keep up and stay, on top of where we should be with all the information that has come out. One interesting thing that came out of that meeting, apparently they had an infectious disease expert talk to the Board of Governors and basically give them a bit of a reality hit as to what they were potentially really looking at. As of right now, the NHL still has tentative measures in place as to when the NHL season could possibly resume if things do get better. If the curve of the COVID-19 disease, the spread gets flattened a little bit within the next couple weeks, we could see things resume. Likely at this point in time, it seems to be the general thought is that that's probably not going to happen. But again, things are changing hourly. So who knows? Hopefully, if we are all taking this as responsibly as we should be by now, taking the proper precautions, we could turn the corner. You never know. You got to keep up hope. But as I mentioned with Mike in that last segment there, man, there's a good chance that if all things do go basically ideally, the NHL season could resume, and as well as the NBA season, as they run, pretty much simultaneously, and the playoffs could go late summer, maybe into September, and then you got to adjust from there because, of course, you're not going to have the next season start a month later. You got the draft, you got free agency period. All of that is hugely affected and thrown out of whack. But as of right now, the tentative plan seems to be that perhaps if things can resume on schedule, we may see the NHL playoffs and the NBA playoffs wrap up sometime in possibly September, and then the new seasons starting in maybe November, maybe December. It's really, really strange to think about, as it is still mind-blowing at this point, the way that the spread of this disease has affected the entire world. And at the same time, very, very strange to think that just like 2 weeks ago, around that time when memos were circulating, and it was still kind of hush-hush because we didn't know exactly what was going to happen. Memos were being circulated saying teams might have to get ready to play games in front of empty stadiums. And we thought that was ludicrous. I don't even know if we were fully wrapping our heads around the possibility of entire seasons being canceled and then, or at the very least delayed, and then possibly canceled altogether, and how to figure it out from there. Obviously, owners, the Board of Governors for these leagues, they have to remain optimistic, because what else are you going to do at this point? You may as well remain optimistic for now and then make adjustments as more information comes out and as it becomes necessary. But as of now, that seems to be kind of the plan going forward. We'll also definitely be standing by to see what happens with the International Olympic Committee, as mentioned earlier on in the show, right off the top. Canada making it official that they will not be sending athletes to the Olympics or the Paralympic Games should they go ahead as planned in July in Tokyo. So obviously big news, and we will see how many other countries follow suit in the very near future here. I have to think there will be more than a few.
Cabin Sports Radio.
If you're a sports fan who is missing live sports, no doubt you've been watching a lot of old sports games. And with that in mind, I thought, well, the last show we did 2 weeks ago, we featured audio from a wild brawl from a hockey league that you've probably never heard of. Well, this is a basketball league you have definitely heard of, and a brawl that happened today in history back in 1993 between the New York Knicks and the Phoenix Suns. Have a great week. We'll talk to you next time on Cabin Sports Radio.
5 seconds to go in the half. 5 seconds to go. Riley looking on. Mason gets it into Rivers. Ainge is on him. Starks. Long jumper, no good at the horn. And look at this.
Now Rivers is coming right after Kevin Johnson. He went after with his fist. Now Ainge is down. We got a brawl right in front of his judge.
Boy, this is getting ugly right now.
Now and Oakley going at it. Barkley holding Rivers. Rivers went right after it. Dick Carter just hit the ground.
Doc Rivers. Look at this.
Hey, Greg Anthony just threw a left hook and nailed Kevin Johnson. Anthony popped him with a left hook behind the back. Hit him behind the back. We got a brawl everywhere, folks.
This is really getting ugly. A free-for-all. Look at this on the floor.
Absolute free-for-all. Chambers now on Anthony.
Was that Greg Anthony who...
Greg Anthony came over.
Greg Anthony and Street Jones on the bench just came over and cheap shot at Kevin Johnson.
Cheap shot with a left hook behind his back.
I mean, he just walked over with a cheap shot and hit Kevin Johnson when he wasn't even expecting it. And nobody even saw it happening because all the action was at the other end of the floor.
George, I got to do something about that. Westfall's telling his team to go back to the locker room right now as he confers with the officials. Marley's saying, wait a minute, we want something done on that. Anthony, and we'll show it.